and I say this more with sadness and anger, I watched the President of the United States say it was a pretty shameful day for Washington on the national news. That was yesterday. And I agree, but for different reasons than the President himself articulated. When good and honest people have honest differences of opinion about what policies our country should pursue when it comes to the Second Amendment and gun rights and mass gun violence, the President of the United States should not accuse them of having no coherent arguments or caving to the pressure. The President could have taken the high road, could have said, okay, now that we've been unsuccessful in these measures, let's move on to the area where we know there's consensus, and that has to do with the mental health element in so many of these mass gun tragedies. But instead, he chose to take the low road, and I agree with him, it was a truly shameful day. I and many of my colleagues are not worried, as some of the press like to portray it, about the gun lobby, who would spend a lot of money and paint us as anti-Second Amendment. I don't work for them. I don't listen to them. I work for 26 million Texans, and I'm proud to represent them. And the views I represented on the floor of the United States Senate are their views. And if I don't represent their views, then I'm accountable to them and no one else. And no, those of us who did not agree with the President's proposals are not being intimidated, as he said yesterday. And it's false. It's absolutely false to say it comes down to politics, as he said. For me, it comes down to a meeting I had with the families who lost loved ones at Sandy Hook Elementary School. I told them that I was not interested in symbolism, in things we might be able to do that would have had no impact on the terrible tragedy that day, or at Tucson, or Virginia Tech, or at Aurora, Colorado. I'm not interested in passing legislation that would have had no impact on those incidents and then patting ourselves on the back and congratulating ourselves, saying, haven't we done a wonderful thing, when in fact it would be to celebrate symbolism over solutions. I'm interested in trying to come up with a solution. I told them that day, the family members who came to visit with me as we grieve with them for their terrible loss, I told them that as I understood what they were telling me, they weren't coming to sell a particular political point of view or an agenda or a legislative laundry list of things they wanted to see passed. It really boiled down to this. These families who lost both children and parents and spouses want to make sure that their loved one did not die in vain. They want to make sure that something good comes out of this terrible tragedy. And why wouldn't we want to work together to try to help them achieve their goals? The President indicated yesterday that the legislation he actually was pursuing, the so-called assault weapons ban, the background check bill, and others, he said none of that legislation would have solved the problem that these families were experiencing. And I happen to agree with that part of what he said. But instead of calling the President names and taking the low road like he did yesterday and chastising my fellow senators for their good faith disagreement and the best policies to pursue in order to make sure these families' loss was not in vain, I'm here to ask for his help. I'm here to ask for every member's help to try to make sure that we actually continue to look for measures that we might be able to get behind to actually make things better, that would have offered up a solution to some of these problems. Now, I've heard Senator Feinstein, who so eloquently spoke in favor of her proposed assault weapons ban, she conceded, I think as she had to, that Adam Lanza would not have been stopped by an assault weapons ban because he stole weapons that his mother legally possessed, and he murdered his own mother before he then went to Sandy Hook Elementary School and murdered innocent children and other adults. So none of the background check bill would not have had any impact on that, and as Senator Feinstein conceded, as she must, neither would the assault weapons ban that we voted on yesterday. But what might have an impact on incidents like occurred at Virginia Tech? What might have had an impact on incidents that occurred in Tucson, where Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was shot and others killed? Well, we know the background check system, the National Instant Criminal Check System, the NICS system that the FBI maintains, depends on the states sending information to the FBI that they could use to screen out gun buyers. As a matter of fact, the shooter at the Virginia Tech had been adjudicated mentally ill by the state of Virginia, but that information was never forwarded to the FBI to be used on a background check, so he could therefore purchase weapons without a hit occurring on the NICS background check system. After 2008, we passed legislation encouraging the states, trying to incentivize them to send that information to the FBI so that wouldn't happen again. And we know from the General Accountability Office, the GAO, that the record of compliance with that law is dismal indeed. Many states just simply haven't done it. I believe there are things we can do to further incentivize the states to send that information so that the background check system maintained by the FBI actually works to preclude shooters like the Virginia Tech shooter from legally buying weapons, because there would be a hit on the background check system and he would be stopped from that source of these weapons. And we know in Tucson, for example, the shooter there failed a drug test when he tried to volunteer for the military. That is also a disqualifying incident that, if had it been reported to the background check system as it could have and should have been, would have prevented him from purchasing weapons legally without being blocked by a hit on the background check system. Why in the world wouldn't we look for ways to improve the current background check regime to stop people like that from buying weapons and committing these mass atrocities? So I believe that there is actually a way forward for us, and I hope that Senator Reid, the majority leader who controls the agenda on the Senate floor, will not choose to quit in our effort to try to find solutions, indeed something we need to pursue instead of just symbolic gestures which would have had no impact on these mass gun tragedies.